There's a particular kind of tension that settles into the online world when a story circles back. Not louder, not clearer, not filled with breaking updates or shocking twists, but heavier. Over the last few days, something subtle yet strangely unsettling has been moving through social media. It hasn't taken the form of a headline, a viral accusation, or a fully shaped narrative. Instead, it's been carried through fragments of conversation, clipped commentary, carefully worded hints, and pauses that seem to hold more weight than the words surrounding them. These moments stop right before they should explain something, and because they stop there, they pull people in deeper. What's interesting is that Tasha K, someone widely known for her boldness and her willingness to push stories into the spotlight with force, chose not to do that this time. She didn't drop names with clarity, she didn't claim certainty, she didn't even provide enough substance to be quoted accurately. And somehow, that restraint has made people more uneasy than any loud declaration would have. Because when someone who is usually anything but subtle becomes careful and measured, it changes how people listen. But even more fascinating, and maybe more telling, is the silence that followed from others. Not the kind of silence that signals ignorance of what's happening, but a noticeably calculated silence. No swift denials, no emotional reactions, no direct engagement, no efforts to shut the conversation down. Instead, what emerged was a sort of stillness, and stillness online is never perceived as simply stillness. It creates space. And in that space, the public begins filling in the gaps with questions, theories, memories, and a sense of unease that grows with every unanswered moment. The question that sits in the center of this is not what happened, but something far more abstract. Why does this feel familiar? And that question is powerful because it pulls people into a narrative even when the narrative itself has no solid foundation. To understand why this moment feels different from previous fleeting waves of online speculation, we need to step away from the immediacy of social media and look at the longer timeline that exists behind it. Kandi and T.I are not newcomers to the entertainment world. They are not temporary figures who appear and disappear with trends or internet cycles. They've each built careers grounded in longevity, reinvention, business strategy, and behind-the-scenes influence that extends far beyond what the public sees. Their public personas have always been carefully managed, but not in a way that feels artificial, more in a way that reflects discipline. Over years of interviews, reality television appearances, public events, and ongoing interaction with fans, they've created a public image that feels accessible, but simultaneously protected. That balance, show enough to stay connected, keep enough to stay safe, usually shields long-standing public figures from the type of speculation that leads to long-term narrative damage. But when people revisit the last decade with today's lens, they're beginning to notice moments that didn't make waves at the time, but also never fully disappeared. These weren't explosive scandals. They weren't stories that dominated news cycles. They even weren't rooted in clear allegations. They were whispers, small, often vague moments that surfaced briefly, lingered quietly, and then faded without closure. Not because the public forgot them entirely, but because nothing happened to push them forward or shut them down. And now, with this recent wave of online tension, people are going back to those moments, not searching for answers exactly, but trying to understand why they stayed lodged somewhere in public memory. What matters most is not what was said in the past, but how it was handled. In earlier years, conversations involving Kandi or T.I tended to follow a familiar pattern. A rumor would surface, commentary would build, and then at some point, a form of clarity, whether through a statement, a legal response, or a strategic shift in tone, would settle the situation. Even silence, when used then, had a finality to it. But over time, that clarity stopped arriving so cleanly. Certain moments ended abruptly. Some topics were brushed aside in interviews. Others never resurfaced again, despite lingering curiosity. And while none of this is evidence of anything in particular, the absence of resolution created an emotional residue that people didn't consciously track until something like this week happened. Part of why these unresolved moments matter now has nothing to do with the individuals involved and everything to do with how the media landscape itself has evolved. Traditional interviews used to be controlled environments. Questions were vetted, tone was curated, narratives were shaped deliberately. But now the internet is an archive. People can replay a moment hundreds of times, slow down a pause, analyze facial expressions frame by frame, compare old clips with new ones, and pull together dots that may or may not be connected. A slight shift in posture becomes meaningful. A tight smile becomes suspicious. Even silence becomes something to interpret.
This shift gave rise to commentary channels and gossip platforms that don't thrive on facts, but on emotional interpretation. Their influence doesn't come from proving their claims, but from tapping into the public's instinctive desire to understand what they feel more than what they know. Tasha K built her platform in this ecosystem. She doesn't craft polished narratives, she floats fragments. Thoughts, impressions, conversations supposedly happening somewhere beyond the camera. And historically, when she mentioned high-profile figures like T.I or Kandi, the reaction wasn't immediate outrage, but prolonged conversation. The names stayed in the atmosphere, not because new information emerged, but because audiences added their own interpretations to the incomplete pieces laid before them. When fragments of speculation linger for years without being resolved, they don't disappear. They settle in the subconscious of the online world, waiting for a moment when the collective emotional environment shifts. And that is what happened now. People weren't responding to new information, they were reacting to the resurfacing of something that felt unfinished. The most compelling part of this moment is not what was said, it's what wasn't. Silence became its own subtle but powerful character in the narrative. No direct rebuttals, no clarifying interviews, no urgency to correct the narrative, just ongoing professionalism and business as usual, which some interpreted as confidence and others as avoidance. And because there was no clarification, interpretation began multiplying uncontrollably. It's important to emphasize this. Silence is not evidence of wrongdoing. Silence is not confirmation. Silence, in many cases, is simply the least disruptive option. But to audiences conditioned to expect immediate responses, silence feels like an unfinished sentence. The human mind hates unfinished sentences. We instinctively want to complete the thought, even when we don't have the information to do so accurately. This is where optics begin competing with facts. Factually, there is no new revelation, no documented timeline, no official allegation, nothing to prove, nothing to disprove. But emotionally, people feel the weight of absence. And because the brain interprets absence as a puzzle piece rather than an empty space, silence becomes louder than speech. At this point, the conversation isn't about names or rumors anymore. It's about psychology. Specifically, the psychology of uncertainty. When we encounter a story that feels incomplete, our brains try to complete it, not because we want drama, but because unresolved narratives create discomfort. When you add parasocial relationships into the mix, where audiences feel like they know a public figure personally, the discomfort intensifies. Viewers expect access, not because they are entitled to it, but because social media has blurred the lines between public and private life. So when access feels restricted or boundaries become more visible than usual, audiences often respond emotionally. Those emotions get mistaken for intuition. That intuition gets mistaken for evidence. And before long, speculation begins to feel like truth, not because of what is known, but because of what is felt. Interestingly, even as speculation swelled, Tasha K didn't escalate. She didn't add more fuel. She didn't push the narrative to extremes. She simply allowed implication to do the work, and implication, when left floating in silence, can become more powerful than accusation. It invites the audience to participate in shaping the narrative themselves, which makes them feel invested in it, even when the foundation is unclear. Silence can mean many things, but the public rarely considers the more complicated explanations. Silence can be a form of privacy, a boundary that says not every speculation deserves a response. It can be strategic, meant to prevent giving oxygen to a narrative that would otherwise fade. It can be legal caution, especially in a climate where statements can be twisted or taken out of context. It can also be emotional self-protection, choosing not to engage with conversations that serve no productive purpose. But the public doesn't experience intention. It only experiences appearance. And when appearance and fact drift apart, narrative fills in the space between them. That's what happened here. Not through a dramatic reveal, but through a quiet accumulation of unanswered moments that created emotional weight. The result is a story that feels important even though no concrete information exists. This is the danger of modern gossip culture. Not that people purposely spread lies, but that meaning accumulates in the spaces where information is missing. At this point, viewers aren't trying to decide what's true. They're trying to understand why the conversation feels unresolved. And unresolved stories breed speculation naturally.
However, now, Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker have been the subject of rumors for years, and that's not new. Their marriage has always generated speculation, whether it's about Todd's intentions, Kandi's preferences, the dynamic between them, or the many whispers about other people allegedly being involved. Some people have claimed Todd was never truly into Kandi romantically and that he saw the marriage as more of a business opportunity. Others believe Kandi may actually prefer women and that Todd simply fits into an arrangement that works for their lifestyle, finances, and public image. And while these are only rumors, the one thing that makes them relevant is the fact that Kandi herself has been willingly talking about intimate details of her marriage publicly, particularly on her podcast platforms. She's the one bringing up threesomes, open marriage questions, and sexual arrangements. So naturally, the public is going to respond to the door she keeps opening. This is where Tasha K stepped in. And in typical Tasha K fashion, she didn't hold back. Recently, she went on a long commentary tangent discussing not only Kandi's marriage, but also the hypocrisy she sees in entertainment and influencer culture. Tasha reminded viewers of the time Kandi shaded her by calling her that blogging lady on national television. According to Tasha, the show used content she personally broke, and not only did Bravo profit from it, but Kandi didn't even acknowledge her contribution respectfully. Tasha said that years ago, people in the industry used to act like they were above bloggers and YouTubers, but now, those same TV personalities are scrambling toward YouTube and Patreon because the traditional entertainment industry doesn't pay like it used to. She mentioned that the industry has shifted, budgets have declined, TV ratings have dropped, and viewers' attention has migrated online, making YouTube one of the most powerful platforms available. And suddenly, every reality star, producer, and personality who once thought YouTubers were nobodies now has a channel, a Patreon, or a podcast. Tasha included Carlos King in that critique as well. She pointed out that when Dr. Simone from Married to Medicine referred to Carlos as a blogger, he got offended. But now, Carlos is doing more YouTube content than actual TV content. She even joked about the show Bell Collective, saying the season felt like it was only 3 or 4 episodes long because the finale was announced so quickly after it premiered. According to Tasha, the signs are obvious. These former TV-centric figures are moving into online spaces because the opportunities that once existed in traditional media just aren't there anymore. And in her mind, Kandi is no exception. Then, Tasha transitioned into the main topic